Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Against Nature. I read an English translation of it, and also I listened to the audiobook of the original French version. My French is not very good, but I just enjoy the sound of the French books in French. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of the Against Nature with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Against Nature, or À Rebours, is a 1884 novel written by the French writer Joris-Karl Huysmans. It is my favorite 19th century French novel and a prime example of the Decadent literature, part of the Decadent movement, which was an artistic and a literary expression in the 19th century Western Europe. The movement took pleasure in perversion and self-disgust, and it emphasized human creativity over logic and nature. And it was represented by such other famous writers as Baudelaire, Arthur Rimbaud, and Oscar Wilde. Against Nature is Huysmans' only major work from his decadent years, since later he reconverted back to Catholicism and his writing became more spiritual and religious. What is Against Nature about? Well, it is about what happens to you when you spend too much time alone, thinking about how much you hate the world. The book is a portrait of Jean de Sons, an eccentric, reclusive and feeble aristocrat who loathes 19th century bourgeois society and tries to isolate himself from it. He noticed that the free thinkers, the doctrinaries of the bourgeois, people who claimed every liberty that they might stifle the opinions of others, were greedy and shameless Puritans whom in education he esteemed inferior to the corner shoemaker. The book is a plotless collection of observations, opinions, analysis, and occasional senseless rants, and general deception with people. Here is a quote that sums up the book's mood and shows the Saint's thoughts on mankind. His contempt for humanity grew fiercer, and at last he came to realize that the world is made up mostly of fools and scoundrels. It became perfectly clear to him that he could entertain no hope of finding in someone else the same aspirations and antipathies, no hope of linking up with a mind which, like his own, took pleasure in a life of studious decrepitude, no hope of associating an intelligence as sharp and wayward as his own with any author or scholar. Now, let's do a brief summary of the book. Against Nature is a narration by Jean de Sons. The story takes place in Fontenay, a small town near Paris, where the narrator isolates himself from society. He is the last member of a noble family, and after living a decadent life in Paris, which leaves him disgusted, he decides to disappear, so he moves to an isolated house in countryside without informing anyone and without leaving a forwarding address. And there he decides to spend the rest of his days thinking and contemplating the misery of human existence. The Sons creates a luxurious hermitage where he isolates himself from the outside world, not only visually, but also from the sounds and smells. He limits his contact with other people to a necessary minimum, and he fills the house with his art and book collection. To let the time pass, the Sons experiments with perfumes, plants flowers, and decides to transform a live turtle into a work of art. He studs the creature's shell with precious stones, which doesn't end well for the turtle. The Sons also recalls episodes from his decadent life in Paris, various love affairs he participated in, which left him with a low opinion of the opposite sex, or the time when he met a teenage boy and took him to a brothel and decided to convert him into a murderer by using Pavlov-like conditioning. After reading one of Charles Dickens' novels, the Sons decides to visit London. While awaiting the train, he dines in an English restaurant and observes people around him. He sees how much they resemble the characters from the novel, and to avoid being disappointed by the real thing, he changes his plans and returns home. In the other chapter, the Sons criticizes current literary choices. He rejects classical Latin writers and shows preference for more eccentric ones, such as Petronius, who represented Roman decadence, and his book Satyricon. He also shows as much dislike for the classic French literature and praises lesser-known writers. In philosophy, his preference goes to Schopenhauer and his pessimistic view of the world. The Sons is mostly active at night, and eventually this, combined with his eccentric diet, takes a toll on his health, and the doctor's prescription is to return to Paris or die. And that's the basic plot. Did I like Against Nature? I did. It is Huysmans' book I enjoyed the most. It was written in his early decadent period when he scoffed society and its traditions, in contrast to his later works, which were written after he found God, made peace with the society, and conformed to its rules. But the book already shows Huysmans' growing disillusion with the decadent lifestyle and lays a foundation for his subsequent extreme shift. The novel is a character study of Jean de Sons, who can be compared to Dostoevsky's Underground Man from Notes from the Underground. And the novel's plotless plot could be taken as a rebuttal to Thoreau's Walden, where the Sons' human creativity goes against Thoreau's nature. There is not one single invention of nature, however subtle or impressive it may be thought to be, that the human spirit cannot create. No forest of Fontainebleau or moonlight scene that cannot be produced with a floodlight stage set. No waterfall that hydraulics cannot imitate so perfectly as to be indistinguishable from the original. No rug that papier-mâché cannot copy, no flower that species taffets and delicately painted papers cannot rival. There's no doubt whatever that this eternally self-replicating old fool has now exhausted the good-natured admiration of all true artists, and the moment has come to replace her, as far as that can be achieved, with artifice. The Sons is an eccentric who takes his beliefs to the extreme, and his eccentrics can be connected to his early bourgeois upbringing, with two distant cold parents and time spent in the Jesuit school, which created the Sons we meet in the novel. We can ask ourselves, what is the motivation for all the eccentrics? Real dislike and dissatisfaction with the society, or psychological need to be different and to go against anything that is common and ordinary? And can one cause the other? It probably doesn't really matter, since the result is the same. By isolating himself and filling his surroundings with books and art, the Sons tries to cure himself of the society and its problems. But it doesn't seem to work. Maybe because he surrounds himself with the products of the very society he despises. The problem is the Sons himself, and his eccentric behavior was not a destination, but a journey, with the final destination being madness. His extreme move from social life in Paris to his isolation in the countryside was nothing more than a superficial adjustment, since he continued to indulge in luxury and excess. In Paris it was socializing and women. In his country hermitage it is reading and decorating. Further, the sons had too high expectation for his self-confinement. The book says, already he was dreaming of a refined solitude, a comfortable desert, a motionless ark in which to seek refuge from the unending deluge of human stupidity. But in the end, he learned that the extreme of solitude wasn't any more sustainable than the extreme of his life in Paris. Besides general disappointment with society, the Sons also mentions the problem with the way it progresses. Last but not least, he hated with all the hatred that was in him the rising generation, the appalling bores who find it necessary to talk and laugh at the top of their voices in restaurants and cafes, who jostle you in the street without a word of apology, and who, without expressing or even indicating regret, drive the wheels of a baby carriage into your legs. And that's the always present struggle between the old and the new generation. The Sons had some novel ideas that can make us question our own ways of doing things. One example that comes to mind is his take on travel. The pleasure of travel, existing as it largely does only in recollection and almost never in the present at the actual moment when it is taking place. Besides, he considered travel to be pointless, believing that the imagination could easily compensate for the vulgar reality of actual experience. It is obvious that Sons preferred his imagination over the reality, and this brings us to the source of the Sons' problems, which was overthinking and overanalyzing. He found he was now incapable of understanding a single word of the volumes he consulted. His very eyes stopped reading, and it seemed as if his mind, gorged with literature and art, refused to absorb any more. One needs to find a balance between doing and thinking. If not, you can either become ignorant or mad. Forrest Gump or Nietzsche comes to mind. To sum it up, Against Nature is about a slippery slope down the hole of madness, and the main culprit seems to be boredom. There is a link between the Sons and Huysmans himself, who had his own radical shift from decadent non-believer to practicing Roman Catholic. And the book contains some flickers of discontent that were responsible for his later conversion. But perhaps he never abandoned his faith. Maybe he was just curious about its limits, and his decadence was just a form of experimenting with it. He writes, "The belief that man is an irresolute creature pulled this way and that by two forces of equal strength, alternately winning and losing the battle for his soul, the conviction that human life is nothing more than an uncertain struggle between heaven and hell, the faith in two opposed entities, Satan and Christ, all this was bound to engender those internal discords in which the soul, excited by the incessant fighting, stimulated as it were by the constant promises and threats, ends up giving in and prostitutes itself to whichever of the two combatants has been more obstinate in its pursuit." And that's why I have some doubts about his non-believer status. To enjoy Against Nature, you will need to read it with patience. It is like aged whiskey. If you try to gulp it down, it tastes horrible. But if you sip it slowly and let it roll around in your mouth, you will appreciate its full flavor. Also, the book should be taken for what it is, a prime example of the Decadent movement. The writing might seem a bit ridiculous at times, but it does sum up pretty well the Decadent movement, which in itself was kind of ridiculous. Are there other books similar to Against Nature? Well, the book seems to be in its own category. Even in the Huysmans bibliography, this is a lone work since it was written in his Decadent period before his return to Catholicism. Dostoevsky's notes from the underground might have served as inspiration for Huysmans, and then he inspired Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think it would be easier to compare Jean de Sons himself, since he is the book, to other literary characters such as Turgenev's Superfluous Man. Anyway, Against Nature is a great classic written in an exquisite prose, such as this one. Immersed in solitude, he would dream or read far into the night. By protracted contemplation of the same thoughts, his mind grew sharp, his vague, undeveloped ideas took on form. And that's where the most of Against Nature's value comes from. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into a hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, which, what I did here, I found this early 20th century painting of this somewhat eccentric looking, dandy-like individual sitting in this self-important manner, which to me reflects the Sons, and I used it to make the cover for Against Nature. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name. And the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So, if you want one, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.